In 1988, one man launched the world's first major network disaster, crashing 10% of the early internet. He demanded no ransom. His intent was not malicious. He simply wanted to count the computers. But at the very same time, another criminal was running from the F.B.I. not for writing code, but for a Porsche and a radio contest. He used technical genius to manipulate phone systems, purely for cash and absolute control. This is the story of two of the greatest system intruders of the late 80s. Robert Tappan Morris, Jr., the M.I.T. genius undone by an algorithmic error, and Kevin Poulsen, the phone freak fueled by insatiable greed. Both were federally charged under the C.F.A.A. Who posed the greater threat to American stability? Join us as we analyze the journeys, techniques, and opposing legacies of these two hacker legends. Part 1. Extreme Introduction and the Opposing Context. The history of cybercrime is often divided into two eras, before and after the late 1980s. This transformation was primarily driven by two men whose genius and eventual downfall defined the boundaries of the digital world: Kevin Poulsen and Robert Tappan Morris, Jr. Though they shared the same birth year, their paths to becoming infamous federal criminals were perfectly opposite. We begin with the stakes. On one side stood Poulsen, known as Dark Dante, a criminal driven by raw ambition and material gain. His domain was the vast, vulnerable American telephone infrastructure. His crimes were not committed in secret code, but through social engineering and the manipulation of human trust, aiming for tangible wealth. Poulsen was not merely a hacker. He was a master criminal, a fugitive aggressively hunted by the F.B.I., Federal Bureau of Investigation, for controlling the very lines of communication that underpinned American commerce. On the other side stood Morris, the son of a chief scientist at the NSA, National Security Agency. His crime was born not of greed, but of unbridled intellectual curiosity. Morris was a graduate student at Cornell, operating within the trusted, pristine academic network known as A.R.P.A.N.E.T, the precursor to the Internet. His transgression was purely technical, the creation and deployment of the infamous Morris worm. This act, intended as a benign experiment to measure the size of the network, spiraled into the world's first major cyber catastrophe. Now let's analyze their initial philosophies and motivations. Poulsen's criminal philosophy was rooted in narcissism and control. His goal was to prove he could command the invisible infrastructure of power, the telephone switches, and extract profit, whether it was a Porsche 944 S2 won by cheating a radio contest or accessing classified government documents. His actions demonstrated a clear intent to defraud, marking him as a high-tech financial predator. Morris's driving force, however, was academic. His initial motivation was simple: to count the number of machines connected to the network. Experts refer to his crime as a case of Icarus syndrome, a brilliant mind flying too close to the sun. His intent was not malicious destruction, but scientific validation. This distinction is paramount. Morris acted with a reckless disregard for consequence, while Poulsen acted with a calculated, greedy disregard for the law. These two men, operating on fundamentally different sides of the ethical and technical spectrum, forced the United States government to acknowledge that the greatest threats to its infrastructure were no longer just military, but could emerge from a payphone booth controlled by a phreaker or a university mainframe controlled by a brilliant yet careless student. The stage was set for a confrontation between the old world of physical crime and the terrifying new realm of cyberspace. Part 2. Technical methodology and the scale of damage. Having established the opposing motivations, Poulsen's material ambition versus Morris's intellectual curiosity, we now dissect the specific methods and the quantifiable damage each man inflicted upon the nascent digital infrastructure. 1. Poulsen's method: the social and telephony attack. Kevin Poulsen's criminal expertise lay not in writing complex malicious code, but in exploiting human and systemic vulnerabilities within the analog telephony network. His methods were a blend of old-school phreaking and sophisticated social engineering. Poulsen's characteristic attack was the takeover of telephone lines. For his infamous attack on the KIIS-FM radio station, he didn't hack a server. He used his knowledge of the Bell system's intricate switching mechanisms to literally reroute all incoming calls to the station to his own line, ensuring he was the 102nd caller to win the grand prize. The total tangible damage from this crime alone, including the Porsche 944 S2 and $20,000 in cash, was assessed at over $50,000 U.S.D. Poulsen also illegally accessed numerous F.B.I. and D.O.D. Department of Defense files, demonstrating a capacity for espionage far beyond simple fraud. His technique focused on control through manipulation, rendering his victims helpless without ever touching their keyboard. Number 2. Morris's method, the algorithmic systemic attack. In stark contrast, Robert Morris utilized cutting-edge algorithmic techniques to launch a devastating attack on the network itself. His Morris worm, deployed in 1988, was a feat of programming genius that exploited two key zero-day vulnerabilities in the UNIX operating system, a flaw in the debugging mode of the sendmail program, and a buffer overflow loophole within the fingered protocol. The worm's method was insidious. It didn't destroy data, it consumed resources. Due to a critical flaw in its self-limiting mechanism, designed to prevent reinfection but flawed to ensure it did reinfect, the worm replicated exponentially. This led to a denial-of-service condition across thousands of computers. The scale of damage, the Morris worm immediately infected approximately 6,000 computers connected to A.R.P.A.N.E.T at the time, representing roughly 10% of the entire connected internet. Experts estimated the collective remediation and downtime costs to universities, military research centers, and government laboratories ranged from $100,000 to $10 million U.S.D. in 1988 dollars. This event transcended financial fraud. It was a systemic failure. 3. The risk comparison, Poulsen versus Morris versus traditional crime. To properly evaluate their danger in the 1980s context, we must compare them to the prevailing threat, organized crime. While Poulsen's criminal enterprise, driven by financial gain, was comparable to sophisticated bank fraud, his physical risk profile was low. Conversely, the high-profile drug kingpins of the time, such as Pablo Escobar, Colombia, or Felix Gallardo, Mexico's C.I.A.D., represented physical violence and a threat to national stability. Poulsen's maximum potential penalty was limited by the value of the fraud and the relative newness of the C.F.A.A. Morris's threat, while non-violent, was unprecedented. His worm demonstrated that one person, acting from a university terminal, could cripple the nation's birth. 2 digital pioneers, Part 3, the flaw, the consequence, and the enduring legacy. The ultimate difference between these two pioneering hackers was revealed not in their exploits, but in their eventual downfall and subsequent life trajectories. Having analyzed their technical threats, we now examine the personal flaws that led to their capture and the profound impact of their respective legal battles. Number 1. The flaw and the capture. The mistakes made by Poulsen and Morris perfectly mirrored their criminal styles. For Robert Morris, the flaw was algorithmic and intellectual. After unleashing the Morris worm, he realized his mistake, a fatal error in the code's replication control mechanism, and attempted to send an anonymous warning to the network. However, the message arrived too late. The brilliance of his own creation allowed other computer scientists to quickly isolate the infection's signature and trace it back through the academic network. Morris was captured because his code failed his intent, leading to an easily traceable digital footprint. For Kevin Poulsen, the flaw was behavioral and narcissistic. After his massive telephone fraud, Poulsen became a highly sought-after F.B.I. fugitive, mastering the art of evasion for nearly 3 years. His downfall wasn't a technical mistake, but an inability to resist the spotlight. Poulsen was captured in 1991 at a supermarket after he made the critical error of contacting the television show Unsolved Mysteries after they aired a profile on him, trying to control the narrative. His capture was facilitated by a tip-off related to his physical location, underscoring the dominance of his human and social vulnerabilities. Number 2, legal consequence and the benchmark of justice. Their sentences established 2 distinct legal benchmarks for cybercrime. Robert Morris was the first person ever indicted and convicted under the C.F.A.A. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986. The prosecution argued that his actions, though perhaps lacking malice, evinced reckless intent and gross negligence. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a $10,000 U.S.D. fine. Crucially, he faced no time in a federal prison, reflecting the court's view of him as a misguided intellectual rather than a hardened criminal. Kevin Poulsen received the opposite judgment. His sentence focused entirely on deterrence and material fraud. He was sentenced to 51 months, 4 years and 3 months, in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for computer crime at the time, plus a $52,000 U.S.D fine. The severity of his sentence was a direct response to his financial gain and his lengthy, conscious evasion of law enforcement. 3. The enduring legacy and the ultimate question. The parallel lives of Poulsen and Morris resulted in two powerful legacies that continue to shape our world. Robert Morris's legacy is institutional. His worm immediately exposed the critical fragility of A.R.P., directly leading to the formation of the C.E.A.T, Computer Emergency Response Team at Carnegie Mellon University. This single act of negligence spurred the modern cybersecurity industry. Morris himself redeemed his genius, becoming a highly respected professor at M.I.T, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, dedicating his life to building the secure systems he once accidentally broke. Kevin Poulsen's legacy is one of personal transformation and applied ethics. After his release, he became a highly effective investigative journalist and senior editor. These two men, once defined by their crimes, ultimately defined the potential of technology itself. Their stories force us to confront the core question. If a hacker's intent is academic, but the technical failure is catastrophic, is that crime less severe than a crime driven by greed, where the technical execution is flawless? Poulsen and Morris left prison, but the digital boundaries they tested, the technical responsibility of code, and the ethical limits of human curiosity remain under intense debate today. Part 4. Expert Analysis and the True Measure of Threat. While the previous sections detailed the technical and legal facts, a full professional analysis requires evaluating the two hackers through the lens of behavioral and criminal psychology to determine their true comparative danger. 1. Expert Assessment of Comparative Threat. Criminal experts generally assess threat based on two factors: intent and controllability. The consensus among security experts is that Morris's act was more dangerous to the system because it led to global network paralysis and forced the creation of C.E.A.T. However, Poulsen was the more dangerous criminal because his actions were calculated, repeatable, and motivated by conscious malice and greed, blurring the lines between cybercrime and traditional organized fraud. 2. Deeper psychological profile. Syndrome analysis. Poulsen and Morris represent two distinct profiles in the realm of high IQ offenders. Robert Morris and the Icarus Complex. The Icarus Complex, a psychological concept, describes individuals whose brilliant ambitions exceed their practical capabilities, leading to spectacular failure. Morris fits this profile perfectly. He had the genius to build the wings, the code, but lacked the wisdom, the throttling mechanism, to manage the global consequences of his flight. His subsequent life as an M.I.T professor demonstrates a successful rechanneling of this ambition into controlled, ethical research. Kevin Poulsen and narcissistic control. Poulsen's actions reflect deep-seated narcissistic tendencies focused on control. His use of social engineering, the art of psychological manipulation, to defeat machines through deceiving people, highlights a criminal who prioritizes the sense of omnipotence. His prolonged evasion of the F.B.I. and the deliberate mockery of the KIISFM contest were extensions of this need to dominate the media and law enforcement infrastructure, a hallmark of the sophisticated white-collar criminal seeking validation through audacious defiance. 3. The lasting impact on the digital ethos. The dual legacy of these two men cemented the ethical dilemma of computing. Morris forced the world to ask, what is the responsibility of the coder? His case established that even unintentional digital destruction is prosecutable. Poulsen forced the world to ask, what is the value of information and trust? His crimes established that the greatest vulnerability in a high-tech system often remains the person answering the phone. Their comparative analysis is essential because it shows that to effectively combat cybercrime, institutions must be prepared to defend against two completely different threats: